The other day we discussed these two subjects, namely Kama Samoha and Kama Sakata Sammaditthi. There's delusion, with the delusion about karma and karma results, not accepting the moral causation. One has led to Kama Samoha, delusion about karma. If one accepts this moral causation, that is saddha, possessing saddha, faith and confidence, and saddha also applies to faith and confidence about the three gems, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So having faith in these two aspects is tantamount to possessing saddha. Based on this, especially in this case the acceptance of the moral causation, one is said to possess a right view, in this case Kama Sakata Sammaditthi, the right view of karma as one's own property, or karma and karma results. This is the first, the light of samsara or light of the world. One is said to have this light shining on oneself, the light of samsara or the light of the world. And we also discussed how this light disappears as a result of not accepting the moral causation. And if one is not mindful with the practice of Satipatthana, not being able to discern mind body, then one will still be doubtful about the discernment of mind and body. That there is such a thing as jiva adda, holding the view of the existence of jiva adda, self, individual self or soul, leading to this distorted view of self or soul, atta deity. In another sense, one is led to this Sakaya deity, a mistaken view about the existence of self or soul or person being individual or the living entity, abiding core in respect of the realities of mind-body aggregates which can be realized directly. This is again Sakaya deity, the distorted view of individuality. This leads to Dhamma Samoha, delusion about the Dhamma, about the Dhamma, about the states. Practicing the Dhamma and being convinced of the discernment of mind and body, one is said to possess Dhamma Bhavutana Sammaditthi, the right view of the defining of the Dhamma. This is the dawn of the first light of sasana, as different from the light of samsara. This is light of sasana. So if one is not aware of this, again, if one is not aware of the conditionality of mind and body, though one understands, one is convinced of the existence of mind and body, if one is still wary or deluded about the conditionality of psychophysical phenomena, especially the relevancy of conditionality, that relevant cause leads to relevant effect, then one is still overwhelmed by this paccaya sammoha, delusion about conditionality. However, with the practice of mindfulness, being convinced of the mind and body and their conditionality, that is the linkage of cause and effect, one is said to come to possess paccaya bhavutana sammaditthi, the right view of defining the conditions. So in continuation with that, with the clarity of vision regarding the conditionality of psychophysical phenomena, one is clear about doubts. There will be, first of all, one will be able to overcome the view of causelessness, ahetuka ditthi. And with being convinced about the relevancy of conditionality, one again is clear about the fictitious cause view, Visama Heduka Deity, that all actions are the result of some omnipotent, autonomous, transcendental force or being. Furthermore, if one takes that everything is the result of karma, past karma, then one is still holding this view of Pubbekata Hetuka Deity. And if one becomes convinced, then one can overcome this distorted view also. So this has been explained, and this can be also verified with your own experiential knowledge with the practice of Satipatthana. Then you are said to have dawned, or the second sasana is said to have dawned upon you. However, if one is not still convinced about the arising and passing away of the psychophysical condition, the psychophysical phenomena, that old is giving place to the new, that things are in a state of flux, especially not being aware of the dissolution part, then one is still deluded about the characteristic of impermanence, anicca lakkhana. And if one is deluded about anicca lakkhana, characteristic of impermanence, one will also be deluded about dukkha lakkhana, the characteristic of unsatisfactoriness, inherent unsatisfactoriness. Only when one is convinced of these two characteristics, namely anicca and dukkha, will one be able to become convinced about the selflessness, soullessness, and insubstantiality of things. If one is not aware of them, then still one will be deluded about these interlocking characteristics of phenomenal existence. This kind of delusion is known as lakkhana samoha, delusion about the characteristics. So, in order to be clear about this, one has got to continue the practice of Satipatthana. If not, one is still overwhelmed by this darkness in terms of this lakkhana samoha, the delusion of characteristics. So, when one becomes convinced about these phenomenal characteristics of phenomenal existence, then one is said to have come to possess this lakkhana pativeda samadhitti, right view about the penetration, right view by penetrating the characteristics, lakkhana pativeda samadhitti, penetrating the characteristics of phenomenal existence, or opening up to this knowledge, awakening to this knowledge of the characteristics. This is the third light of sadhana. Today we shall discuss this subject, the third light of sadhana, and the lakkhana pativeda samadhitti, both from the theoretical and practical aspects. It's the lakkhana samoha, darkness, the darkness of lakkhana samoha, the delusion about the characteristics, and the light of lakkhana pativeda samadhitti, right view by penetrating the characteristics. These are two opposite things. One is darkness, one is a light. Now, first of all, we should understand about what is meant by this lakkhana, marks or characteristics. Then only we shall understand the rest. In the practice of Vipassana, there are two characteristics, lakkhanas or marks. The first one is sabhava lakkhana, and the second one is saminya lakkhana. These two things. Now, every mind and body has its own individual essences and qualities or characteristics. That is sabhava lakkhana. For example, in the Prithvi Dhatu, the earth element has the characteristic of hardness, softness, coarseness, and so on. All these things are called sabhava lakkhana, individual characteristic, marks, or specific marks or characteristics, or sometimes called natural marks or natural characteristics. So too with the other elements, such as tejo dhatu, the element of temperature, has its own sabhava, individual essences or characteristics, as heat, cold, warmth, and so on. These are the characteristics of temperature element. And then above this abo dhatu, the element of water or liquidity, has its natural characteristics, individual essences, sabhava lakkhana in terms of flowing, cohesion, solidity. These are the individual characteristics, marks, or specific or natural characteristics or marks of the abo dhatu, the element of liquidity or element of water. And so is with the vayo dhatu, the element of wind or distension. The sabhava lakkhana, the natural characteristics, are things like stiffness, tension, movement. All these things make up the individual essences, individual marks, specific or natural marks or characteristics of vayo dhatu. These are the materialities. 4 primary elements are the materialities. Now how about the mentality, the consciousness, the nature of the consciousness? The sabhava lakkhana of consciousness is knowing the object. It has the nature of knowing the object. And this cognition of the object, knowing the object, is the individual characteristic or specific characteristic of consciousness or mentality. And with phassa, the characteristic, natural characteristic is contact with the objects. And vedana has a characteristic or specific individual nature or characteristic of feeling. In this way, each mind body has its own individual, specific, natural marks or characteristics. Like when you take food, every item of food has its own individual flavor or taste, or specific or natural flavor or taste. These are called sabhava lakkhana, sabhava, natural or individual characteristics. So as for the other characteristic, namely samminya lakkhana, it is given as universal or common characteristic. In the body are these, in every mind body has its characteristic of not being permanent, not being stationary, arising and disappearing, and not stationary for one moment. They rise and each rises and passes away. So the old is giving place to the new. As the old disappears, the new one comes in to take its place. So every sabhava lakkhana, natural characteristic, has its own common characteristic in terms of this impermanent nature, arising and disappearing. Like the water, the flowing water in a stream, it appears that the water is the same, remains the same, because they are of the same nature. Things of the same nature can appear as being stationary without any change, like this water. Because water, each droplet of water is of the same nature as other droplets of water, and so although they are flowing, the old is giving place to the new, the old disappearing and the new coming in to take its place, you think it is the same water. It appears at least. In fact, they are changing. They are in a state of flux. The old is giving place to the new, the old one disappearing, and the new one coming in. Because the preceding particle is of the same nature as the succeeding particle, they look alike. One thinks, or it appears at least, it remains the same. Again, with the example of the fire and the light, the burning fire also is burning the fuel one after another, disappearing, the old disappearing and the new one coming in. So is the light, the electricity passing through, and this electricity is rising and passing away. The old giving place to the new, the old disappearing and new one coming in to take its place. So in this way, the mark of this rising and passing away, or the characteristic of this impermanence, is the common characteristic which is common to all objects, mind or body. Hence the name Samanya Lakkhana, common or universal characteristic. Common because they are common to all. They have the common characteristic. For instance, this anicca lakkhana, the characteristic of impermanence, is common to all. Because they rise and disappear, they are impermanent, they are not durable, they are not stationary, they are not strong enough, so they cannot be satisfactory. Hence, each mind-body has its own inherent unsatisfactoriness. This is known as dukkha lakkhana, the characteristic of unsatisfactoriness, or simply suffering. Because of the impermanent characteristic, because of the impermanent mark, it has lack security, it becomes dangerous, unsatisfactory, hence it is known as dukkha lakkhana. So we have these two characteristics, which is common to all phenomena, namely anicca and dukkha. And they are not stable, they are not reliable. There's no jiva, atta, self or soul, individual self or soul in it. They arise at their own will, not at your will. They arise at their own accord. Like the weather conditions which is happening outside, it's always changing. Sometimes hot, sometimes cold, sometimes wet, sometimes dry, sometimes windy, sometimes not windy. So these are natural things, natural occurrences. They are not caused by any omnipotent, autonomous, transcendent force or being, small or large. They are rising at their will, on their own. And they are not governable, they are not controllable. So just their nature, the work of nature. Same thing is what's happening in the body. They are known as anatta lakkhana, the characteristic of selflessness or soullessness or impersonality. And they are rising at their own, on their own, because there is no controllable atta in it. Let us say when we are watching this rising and falling, we observe the stiffness, tension, movement, relaxation, hardness, softness and so on. All these things are natural, individual, specific characteristics, sabhava lakkhanas. And this, they rise and disappears. They are not stationary. So they have these common characteristics. Samanya lakkhana. Same thing is when you are noting falling. There are these sabhava lakkhana, and these sabhava lakkhanas arise and disappears. They have this common characteristics, common marks, namely samanya lakkhana. So as much as there's impermanent characteristic, there are this inherent unsatisfactoriness, and there is also this selfless nature. So this way, these universal characteristics of phenomenal existence are also known as akara, they are marks, and they are common characteristics, samanya lakkhana. So in this way we have these two characteristics, samanya lakkhana, sabhava lakkhana and samanya lakkhana. Sabhava means individual, unique, natural characteristic, and the samanya lakkhana are common or universal characteristics, namely the impermanent nature and so on. So in this way, first of all, it is necessary to understand these two characteristics. Only then one will be able to understand the subject of lakkhana samoha and lakkhana pativeda samadhi. So to understand better these two characteristics, sabhava lakkhana, samanya lakkhana, the individual and common characteristics. Let's say we go shopping to buy new cloth or clothes, a piece of cloth, for instance, let us say, and you see a piece of cloth which you like it very much, you like the color and its workmanship, and but you look for any flaws as you always do, and you find some holes in it, you become disappointed. First one hole, and second, and 3 holes in the cloth. 3 holes is too many. So you fancy this cloth before you discover these holes. Now once you discover these holes, you become disappointed. You don't like it. After you have surveyed carefully, there are 3 holes in the cloth. Now, this question is asked: is the cloth the whole or the whole the cloth? Now, these two things are separate. The cloth and the piece of cloth and the holes are separate. 2 separate things. Now, the 3 holes in the cloth are the common characteristics, sabhava lakkhana, and the piece of cloth itself is the 3 holes in the cloth is samanya lakkhana, common characteristic. Let us say in English it's better, common characteristic. And the cloth itself is individual characteristic. It is individual characteristic. And 3 holes is a common characteristic. Now before you discover these holes, you fancied it and you liked it very much. You became attached to the cloth. Now when you look carefully, you become detached. You're disappointed because you discover these flaws in it. So again, the cloth and the holes are separate. Now this detachment, is it on the hole, on the 3 holes, or on the cloth? That is the question. Now, the 3 holes, again, are the common characteristics. They are the common characteristics, and the cloth itself is the individual characteristic. So because you saw the holes, you become detached to the cloth. Previously, you liked this cloth. With the cloth. So the 3 holes are the common characteristic, and the cloth itself, the piece of cloth itself, is the individual or unique characteristic. In the earlier on, you have this Dhamma Bhavotana Sammaditthi, the right view, by defining the Dhamma, mind-body. You are aware of this mind-body, existence of mind and body, or discernment of mind and body. This is Dhamma Bhavotana Sammaditthi. The right view by defining the Dhamma, Nama Dhamma, Rupa Dhamma. And then also another Sammaditthi, Paccaya Vavotana Sammaditthi, the right view by defining the conditionality of cause and condition. You come to be convinced of the cause and effect of mind and body. That is Paccaya Vavotana Sammaditthi. At this stage, you are only aware of the sabhava lakkhanas, individual, natural, unique characteristics, the characteristics of mind and body, such as stiffness, tension, movement, heat, cold, and so on. All these things are sabhava lakkhana, not yet sabhanya lakkhana in terms of the impermanent nature and so on, the characteristics, as yet. So in the first stage of knowledge, you know only the sabhava, the individual essence or characteristic of mind body. And at this stage, out of the three characteristics of phenomenal existence, namely impermanent, unsatisfactoriness, and so on, you only are aware of the middle part of that object, of the object noted. When you note stiffness, you only observe the middle part of that stiffness, and so on, and not yet the beginning and the end of that stiffness, of that object. Now, in the second stage, you come to observe the beginning of that object, for instance, stiffness. So, in the second stage, you observe the beginning and the middle of this object, not yet the end of that object. So you are not convinced of, so long as you are not aware of the end of the object, you are not convinced of the impermanent nature of that object. You are not aware of this characteristic of impermanence, hence you are under this lakkhana samoha, delusion about the characteristic. When once with the practice of satipatthana, you come to realize the three parts, the beginning, middle, and the end of the object noted, then you come to penetrate the characteristic. Hence, you are cultivating this Sammaditthi, right view, namely Lakkhana Padiveda Sammaditthi, the right view by penetrating the characteristics. Let us say, in the earlier or lower two stages of insight knowledge, one is not seeing the end part or dissolving part of the objects. One sees only the middle part, later the beginning and the middle. For instance, one is noting rising and falling, and in the beginning one loses mindfulness or loses the object a lot. Later one becomes concurrent, one's mind becomes concurrent with the object noted with the practice, being free of the hindrances, impurities. One's mind becomes pure, free of these hindrances for 1 minute, 2 minutes, and so on continuously. And very soon, when one is noting this rising, then one observes the rising is not mixed with falling, and when one notes falling, one is not mixed up with rising, confused with rising. Also, when one is noting this object, rising or falling, one is able to observe separately the object noted and the noting mind. However, one sees only the very strong, obvious middle part of the objects. Another example is when you have this another sensation in your body, an itch. For instance, you observe the middle part of the itch, and before you are able to, before this sensation dissolves, then another itch or another object, another sensation arises in your body, and you leave that, and your noting mind jumps on to another object. And sometimes, of course, you back your noting mind back to your main object at times. And only, but you only see the middle, very strong, obvious middle part of the object. And in the second stage of insight knowledge, it is not so. For instance, you note this rising, you observe the beginning, and observe, of course, the middle part, but not yet the end. And you note falling, you observe the middle and the beginning and the middle, but not the end, not yet the end. Before it ends, rising takes place, so you go on noting this rising and so on. So you know these two parts, the middle, the beginning and the middle parts, not yet the end part of the object. Therefore, this kind of insight cannot be included, cannot be considered a real insight knowledge, Vipassana jnana. So in the first stage also, first stage of insight knowledge, first stage of knowledge, not insight knowledge, but first stage of knowledge, you have this Dhamma Vavotana Sammaditthi. You possess this right view by defining the Dhamma, the mind-body Dhamma, the Nama Dhamma, Rupa Dhamma. You only are aware of this mind-body, Nama Rupa Dhammas, and not yet gain the insight knowledge. In the second stage of the knowledge also, you are able to observe the middle, the beginning and the middle, not yet the end, so that you only possess this right view, Paccaya Vavotana Sammaditthi, the right view by defining the conditionality. You only know the causes because you observe the beginning. You are aware of the cause. So this Paccaya Vavotana Sammaditthi, the right view by defining the conditionality, is also not yet the real insight knowledge. Not included, not considered as a real insight knowledge, Vipassana jnana. The reason is that you are not discovering or you are not observing the end part, the dissolving part of the object noted as yet. Hence, it is still not the real insight knowledge. So, when it comes to this mark of arising and passing away, you are still in the darkness. You are still deluded about the arising and going away, coming and going away. That means you are still under Lakkhana Samoha. Pardon me. Lakkhana Samoha, delusion about the characteristic. You are still on the darkness of Lakkhana Samoha, the delusion about characteristic. While noting, in the course of the practice, mind you, in the course of the practice, not in the course of thinking. While you are noting this object, you observe the beginning of that object, and very soon it passes away. You observe the dissolving part of the object. In this way you observe the coming and going away, the coming and disappearing. Then you say at last, oh, I am convinced of the impermanent nature of the object noted. And at once you are open to the characteristic of impermanence, anicca lakkhana. You are said to have penetrated the truth in respect of the characteristic of impermanence. Then you possess this light. The light dawns on you in terms of this lakkhana pativeda samadhi, the right view by penetrating the characteristic and overcome this darkness of lakkhana samoha, delusion about characteristic. Yet another example, when you are noting rising, you observe the beginning, middle and the end very clearly, especially the last part of it, the dissolving part of it, and the rising takes place, dissolves, then falling comes in, You observe the beginning, middle and the end. The same thing with other objects like heat, cold, all the sensations that you note. You observe the three parts of each object, the beginning, the middle and the end. In the course of the practice, you come to see the objects coming and going, appearing and disappearing. Then you observe this impermanent nature of the object noted. You are open to your knowledge, you are awakened to the knowledge of impermanence, the truth of impermanence. Hence this Lakkhana Pativeda Sammaditthi, the right view by penetrating the characteristic. So because you are aware, you are awakened to this knowledge of anicca Lakkhana, very clearly seeing the truth. This is you are cultivating insight knowledge, Vipassana jnana. V means the variety of characteristics, variety of unique characteristics. In this case, the anicca, dukkha, anatta, these are the unique variety of unique characteristics. And Vipassana means seeing. You are seeing the variety of unique characteristics. So you observe, you are convinced about this coming and going of the objects in the course of the practice, and you are cultivating insight knowledge, the real insight knowledge. This is the beginning of the insight knowledge. Or, because you are aware of this impermanent nature of the objects, this is also cultivating anicca vipassana, jnana, knowledge of the contemplation of impermanence. This is vipassana jnana. Yet another example, in every object there are these three parts: the arising genesis, aging, and then dissolving, the three parts, the beginning, middle and end, or genesis, arising, aging, and dissolving. Now in the first two stages of knowledge, one can observe up to the middle level, the aging level, from the genesis to the aging level, but not yet the dissolving part, dissolution part. Hence one is still covered under the influence of some moha, delusion, still deluded. And with the continued practice, one comes to observe the third part of that object, namely the dissolving part. Then one comes to see the truth, open to knowledge, awaken to this knowledge, or awaken to this right view or understanding, Sammaditthi, Lakkhana Pativeda Sammaditthi, the right view by penetrating the characteristics. Now as to this Lakkhana Pativeda Sammaditthi, right view by penetrating the characteristic, one sees the three parts of the object completely, of any object noted. Let us say when you have a sensation like itch, it at once appears, comes up in your body, then you notice the beginning of that itch sensation, and it slowly ages. That means you're still feeling the itch. Aging towards dissolution actually. And then it dissolves. You observe that, the three parts of that object. So you observe the three parts of that sensation. Then you're convinced of the impermanent nature of that object, in this case this sensation. You're open to this knowledge, awaken to this knowledge. Hence this Lakkhana Sammaditthi, or Lakkhana Pativeda Sammaditthi. Is it observed? Are you convinced through thinking, or from books, or from what the teachers say, or hearsay? It is not so. You are convinced through practice, your empirical knowledge, by noting, while noting this sensation, and this is how it happens. Then only you see the truth. Your empirical knowledge is your true knowledge. So this itch arises and then goes on itching and then disappears altogether. And in this way you observe the characteristic of impermanence. This is insight knowledge. Or because you are seeing the impermanent nature, contemplating the impermanent nature of the object, and this is also known as anicca vipassana. So this in the former knowledge, you are not yet observing, or you had not observed the end part of it, so you are not clear-cut about the impermanent nature of the object. That's why you are overwhelmed by this lakkhana samoha, the darkness or delusion about the characteristics. Now once you see the end part of because you are not seeing the end part of it, you are not seeing the truth of impermanence. Once you see the end part of it, then your knowledge, you are said to have penetrated this truth in terms of seeing the impermanent nature of the object. In this way, the darkness disappears, the light appears, and in this expression, Vijupada Avijja Nirodho. Vijupada, because of the light of truth, seeing, penetrating the truth, opening the truth, seeing the truth clearly. By seeing the truth clearly, Avijja Nirodho, the ignorance about not seeing the end part of the object noted disappears. That means when the light comes, darkness disappears automatically. So in the former knowledge, former stages of knowledge, you have not seen the end part of it. You still have this samoha, darkness of delusion. And when it comes to this knowledge opening to the truth of impermanence, this samoha is overcome, disappears. Like when the light comes, darkness disappears. This light of the third light of sasana is said to have dawned upon you. Now Yogi may ask, can we do this shortcut method? Instead of going through the first two stages of jnana, can we not start with the real insight knowledge? By seeing the three holes, by seeing the three characteristics. In the beginning, the answer is not possible. You cannot do a shortcut method in Vipassana. First of all, you need to purify your mind. Then only you will come to observe this mind and body, and then the causal mode. After the mind and body, the causal mode, the conditionality of mind and body, and only after these two stages one can advance to insight, real insight knowledge. Without going through the first two stages, one cannot realize this insight knowledge. Only by being based on the first two stages can one gain this real insight knowledge. Otherwise not. So when just like when you're looking for holes in the cloth, you have to look at the holes of the cloth. The cloth are in the holes, the holes in the cloth, and you have to look at the cloth first. The cloth in the form of this sabhava lakkhana. Sabhava lakkhana, that means mind, body, and causal mode. They're like the cloth. Then only after you have examined the cloth, piece of cloth, will you be able to see the three holes in terms of these common characteristics. The cloth is like the individual or unique characteristic. Now, without seeing the sabhava, again this Pali, individual characteristic of this mind, body, and causal mode, they are included under sabhava lakkhana, individual characteristic. Only when you examine or after you have observed or seen this sabhava lakkhana, this individual characteristics of mind, body and causal mode, will you be able to see the wholes in terms of these common characteristics. Without the cloth, you cannot see the holes, because the holes are in the cloth. So too, only after observing this sabhava lakkhana in terms of mind, body and causal mode, mind, body, namarupa, sabhava, mind, body, characteristic, and the characteristic of causal mode, cause, effect, sabhava. Without being based on these two things, you cannot realize the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha and so on. Therefore, it is not possible, the answer is not possible to start in a shortcut way, to start from this real insight knowledge of seeing the three characteristics at once. So first you must purify your mind of the hindrances to progress, and still your mind with Khanika Samadhi. Only when your Khanika Samadhi deepens will you be able to see the mind, body and the causal mode. These are the individual characteristics. And after seeing these individual characteristics, will you be able to see the universal or common characteristics, that is just like seeing the wholes, the three wholes, namely the three characteristics of phenomenal existence. So in a way, this without contemplating the sabhava lakkhana, that is individual characteristics in terms of mind, body and cause and effect, one cannot cultivate insight. So if you want to cultivate insight, you must first go through the contemplation of mind, body and causal mode. However, since insight knowledge is based on these two earlier insight, earlier knowledge, depending on this insight knowledge, unavoidably the first two stages can also be taken as insight. This is another way of doing it. You can call the first two stages as insight also. So in this way, you can take the first two stages as insight knowledge. That is another way. So the time is up. We'll continue tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Or day after tomorrow. Or day after tomorrow. Or day after tomorrow.